Okay, 3, 2, 1. Alright, hi guys. My name is Blessed Blaklyt, and welcome to Blaklyt Reads Medicine. So, what is Blaklyt Reads Medicine about? Basically, I don't want to go through this semester without learning anything. So, I came up with a brilliant idea. I hope it is brilliant though. What I came up with is, since I have interest in cameras and computers and this kind of technology stuff, why don't I record videos? Now, what videos am I going to record? I'm going to read my PPTs, and then while I read them, I'll be recording, and after that I'll watch videos that have a connection with these PPTs, and when I'm done, I'll tell myself, I'll tell the camera what I think about what I've read and what my understanding about it is, and that I believe will help me to at least learn something during the semester, because this whole COVID season is just discouraging when it comes to learning. Yeah, basically that's it. So let's dive into it. So for this semester, what I have here is my timetable. We have treated 5 topics, 5 main topics. No, I think 7 main topics, and that's under neurology. And these topics are common symptoms and methods in neurology, seizures and epilepsy, infections of the central nervous system, cerebrovascular diseases, myasthenia gravis, Parkinson's disease, and peripheral neuropathy. We've finished all these topics, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to take them PPT by PPT. And what I'll be looking at is common symptoms and methods first. That was taught by my teacher, Hunan. Yeah. Alright, so basically this is it. Let's dive into it. Common symptoms. My hospital, the hospital I'm doing my internship at right now, is Hunan Provincial People's Hospital, and they teach us the clinical courses. Yeah, so we have disorders of consciousness. Alright. Consciousness is maintained by the brainstem reticular activating system and its ascending projections to the thalamus and cerebral hemisphere. Disorders of consciousness include the change of level of consciousness, arousal and wakefulness, and the content of consciousness, that's cognitive function. So disorders of consciousness includes the change of level of consciousness, that is from arousal to wakefulness, and the content of consciousness, cognitive function. Alright, I think I understand that. Consciousness is maintained by the brainstem reticular activating system and its ascending projections to the thalamus. The brainstem reticular activating system over here, and its ascending projections to the thalamus and cerebral hemisphere. Disorders of consciousness include, so when there's a change of the level of consciousness and the content of consciousness, that's when you have a disorder. Now, the disturbance of consciousness, disturbances of the level of consciousness, we've got somnolence, sopor, and coma. Is this sopor? Alright, so somnolence, sopor, and coma. Somnolence. The early stage of disorders of consciousness, the patient can be woken up by slight stimuli. Okay. Sopor, a state in which vigorous stimuli is needed. Vigorous stimuli are needed to elicit a response. And we've got coma, condition of unresponsiveness. The comatose patient is unarousable and unable to respond to external events and internal needs. The eyes are closed and don't open spontaneously. So disturbances of the level of consciousness, we've got 3 of them. The somnolence, which is the early stage, where the patient can be woken up by slight stimuli. We've got sopor, in which vigorous stimuli is needed to elicit a response. And we've got coma, where the person does not respond and then is unarousable, unable to respond to external events and internal needs. Their eyes are closed and they don't open spontaneously. Abrupt onset of coma usually suggests subarachnoid hemorrhage, brainstem stroke, or intracerebral hemorrhage. A slower onset and progression occur with other structural mass lesions. Disturbances of the content of consciousness includes an acute confusional state and delirium, which is manifested by misinterpretation, illusion, disturbance of sleep-wake cycle, psychomotor disturbance, and mood disturbance. So we've got disturbance of the level of consciousness, where we talked about somnolence, sopor, and coma. And we said that disturbance of the level of consciousness, if it gets to coma suddenly, it could be subarachnoid hemorrhage, it could be brainstem stroke or intracerebral hemorrhage. And if it's slow, then it could be structural or mass lesion. But we've got the content of consciousness, and this is about an acute confusional state and delirium. So with the level of consciousness, is about stimuli. How aware is the person? But with the content of consciousness, the person is confused and in a state of delirium, which is manifested by, that is how you see it, or how other people are able to identify that someone is in a confusional state and delirium, is misinterpretation, illusion, disturbance of sleep-wake cycle, psychomotor disturbance, and mood disturbance. All right. So persistent vegetative states. So we've got, this is a severe bilateral hemispheric disease, an initially coma state. Be awake but lie motionless and without evidence of awareness or higher mental activity. So an initially coma state. So is this trying to say that this is a severely bilateral hemispheric disease, and it is a state, an initial state of coma, where the person is awake, they can't move or they don't move, and there is no evidence of awareness or higher mental activity. Brain death. So that's persistent vegetative state. Brain death. It is, okay, the definition of brain death is controversial, right? The irreversibly comatose patient must be shown to have lost all brainstem reflex responses for at least 6 hours. Hypothermia and overdosage with central nervous system depressants drugs must be excluded. So with brain death, he's saying that the definition is controversial. Irreversibly comatose patient. The irreversibly comatose patient must be shown to have lost all brainstem reflex responses for at least 6 hours. Alright, so I think that's the definition, that a patient loses all their brainstem reflex responses for at least 6 hours. And then in that same patient, hypothermia and overdose. Hypothermia and overdose. Hypothermia and overdose with CNS depressant drugs have to be excluded. Alright, so what are the brainstem reflex responses? We've got 6 of them. Starting from here, we've got pupillary reflex, we've got corneal reflex, we've got oculovestibular reflex, we've got oculocephalic reflex, respiratory reflex, oropharyngeal reflex. And we have something. Okay, so you really want to understand this, So corneal reflex, pupillary reflex, oculovestibular reflex, oculocephalic reflex, respiratory reflex, oropharyngeal reflex. What I'm gonna do is I'm gonna try and understand each of these, right? Basically, I'm gonna try and understand each of these. So Okay, so let's make this small so we can have both on the same page. Yeah. So what we're looking at is the brainstem reflex response. We've got a corneal reflex. So let me see. It's also known as the blink reflex, an involuntary blinking of the eyelids elicited by stimulation of the cornea, such as by touching or by a foreign body, though could result from any peripheral stimulus. So basically it's when the person blinks. That's the corneal reflex by stimulation of the cornea, right? It's saying that it's caused by a loop between the trigeminal sensory nerves and the facial motor nerve innervation. Let me see. I just want the definition. I already got it here. Involuntary blinking of the eyelids elicited by stimulation of the cornea. And then we've got oculovestibular reflex, right? We've got oculovestibular reflex. That is what the head is elevated to 30 degrees above horizontal so that the lateral semicircular canal is vertical, and so that stimulation will generate a maximal response. Okay, so I don't understand that. I'm gonna try to open this. The vestibuloocular reflex is a gaze stabilizing reflex. The sensory signals encoding head movements are transformed into motor commands that generate the sensory signals encoding head movements are transformed into motor commands that generate compensatory eye movements in the opposite direction of the head, thus ensuring stable vision. Okay, so when you turn the person's head right, their eye should look left. When you turn the head left, the eye should look right. When you tilt the head back, the eye should look down, and when you tilt the head forward, the eye should look up, right? And then when you put cool water in the right side, the eye should look right. When you put this is oculocephalic. I was looking for oculovestibular. But anyway, this makes sense, so let's stick to it. Okay, let's go see. There's caloric response and oculocephalic response. Oculocephalic is this, right? There's no caloric. Anyway, when you put cool water in the left, the eye should look left. When you put in both sides, the eye should look down. But when you put warm water in both ears, the eye should look up, right? I think it will be easier.
Types of eye movements are under voluntary control: pursuit and saccades. Two types of eye movements are under voluntary control: pursuit and saccades. As this subject follows a light, her eyes move smoothly and completely in normal pursuit. As our subject shifts her gaze from one stationary target to another, her eyes move rapidly and accurately in normal saccades. One eye movement is not under voluntary control, the vestibuloocular reflex. It is elicited by passive movement of the patient's head, often called the oculocephalic or doll's eye maneuver. With passive movement of our subject's head, her eyes move in an opposite direction. In subjects like her, who have normal pursuit eye movements, the oculocephalic maneuver is not meaningful. But in patients who have impaired pursuit and saccadic eye movements, this is a very valuable test. Here, for example, is a patient who has impaired voluntary eye movements. When he is instructed to pursue a moving target, his eyes move very little. When he is told to switch his gaze from one stationary light to another, his eyes hardly move. Look to your right, left, down. When this patient's head is passively moved in the oculocephalic maneuver, his eyes move much better than with pursuit or saccades. This dissociation between impaired voluntary eye movements, pursuit and saccades, and preserved involuntary eye movements, the vestibuloocular reflex, is called a supranuclear gaze palsy. It is observed in many cerebral disorders, but most often in a degenerative condition called progressive supranuclear palsy. If a patient cannot move her eye in a particular direction, as you see here, the problem could be a tight eye muscle that is holding it back. One way to diagnose a tight eye muscle is a maneuver called forced ductions or passive ductions. The suction-duction device is handy for this. It is placed over the cornea of the anesthetized eye. If you encounter resistance as you move the eye, as you see here, the diagnosis is a tight eye muscle.
Okay, most of that was useless and weird, but I think we got what we needed. Yeah. Let me see. Okay, so that was the ocular vestibular, I think. But now I know that the ocular vestibular reflex oculocephalic, these guys are about moving the eye up and down, making sure that the patient's eye, vestibuloocular, ocular vestibular. Yeah, this one. Patient's eye stays where it's supposed to stay, or stays, goes on the opposite side of the head movement. Yeah, respiratory reflex. Now I've got respiratory. Respiratory reflexes encompass a significant repertoire of responses to a variety of sensory receptors, regulating the depth and frequency of individual breaths and participating in the protection of airways from potentially damaging inhaled substances. It doesn't make sense. What are the respiratory reflexes? Cessation of breathing, shallow rapid breathing, coughing, sneezing, mucus secretion, and airway constriction. These reflexes protect the airways from irritants and facilitate the removal of inhaled substances potentially harmful to the lungs and airways. So basically, that's what respiratory reflexes are. You get mucus secretion, airway constriction, coughing, sneezing, rapid and shallow breathing, or cessation of breathing. When you hold your breath, the ongoing accumulation of carbon dioxide in your cells, in your blood and lungs will eventually irritate and trigger impulses from the respiratory center part of your brain. Rising levels of carbon dioxide signal the body to breathe and ensure our unconscious and autonomous respiration. That's it. So unconscious and autonomous respiration. Let's search for Radial reflex. Said oropharyngeal, right? These people are saying it's pharyngeal. We've got pharyngeal reflex, gag reflex, or laryngeal spasm is a reflex contraction of the back of the throat evoked by touching the roof of the mouth. When you put your hand down there in your throat, you feel like vomiting. You have that gag. That's a gag reflex. We've got pupillary reflex. I know that's where the eye, the pupils react to light. Pupillary light reflex or photopupillary reflex is a reflex that controls the diameter of the pupil in response to the intensity or luminance of the light that falls on the retinal ganglion cells of the retina in the back of the eye, thereby assisting in adaptation of vision to various light levels. So that's the one where the pupils dilate or constrict based on how much light is hitting them. Right? So basically, these are the reflex stuff, right? And what we're saying is that if a person loses all these brainstem reflex responses for at least 6 hours, and we rule out hypothermia and overdose with CNS depressant drugs, then we have what we call brain death. But before that, we have the persistent vegetative state, where the person is has bilateral hemispheric disease, where the person is in an initially coma state, or the initial parts or initial stages of coma, and then they are awake but they lie motionless, and there is no evidence of awareness or higher mental activity. And we have what we call the Loctin syndrome, or de-efferented state, bilateral ventral pons lesion, and this is a conscious state. There's blinking voluntary eye movement in the vertical plane, and there's pupillary response. And we'll search. We've got Loctin syndrome. It's a rare neurological disorder characterized by complete paralysis of voluntary muscles, except for those that control the eyes. Paralysis of complete paralysis of voluntary muscles except the ones that control the eye. People with Loctin syndrome are conscious and can think and reason, but unable to speak or move. So they can speak. People with Loctin syndrome, they are conscious, they can think, they can reason, but they are unable to speak or move. Vertical eye movements and blinking can be used to communicate. Alright. So this is a bilateral ventral pons lesion, and it's a conscious state, blinking voluntary eye movements in the vertical plane, and pupillary response. So we've got aphasia. What is aphasia? Aphasia should be diagnosed only when there are deficits in the formal aspects of language, such as naming, spontaneous speech, comprehension, repetition, reading, and writing. Speech hemisphere always lies in the dominant side. So it looks like we have different types of aphasia here. Right, aphasia, I believe aphasia is when the person is unable to remember specific names. They are unable to make their statements clear. They are unable to say exactly what they want. They are unable to read. They are unable to write. Right? Alright, so okay, this is about reading. So let's go search for the definition of aphasia and then come back. Alright, so one thing that happens in my medical school is we were not really taught the medical terminology in English, right? So when the teacher comes in and they use these terms, they expect that since you understand English, you know these words, but that's not a fact, or that's not the case. So anytime we're taught where we have these medical terminology, and we have to make the effort to go and find out the meaning of these words individually. After learning medical terminology on our own, we also have to put in that extra effort, and I believe it helps because it helps revise. It helps you go back to the basics, and your fundamentals are important when it comes to medicine, right? So that's why I always make it a point to go back and at least find out the definition or the meaning of one or two words and then continue. So aphasia is the loss of ability to understand or express speech, right? So it's a disorder that results from damaged portions of the brain that are responsible for language. All right, so it's about language. All right, so we've got 5 types of aphasia. Okay, and depending on which parts they are affected, we have the types. We've got the Wernicke's, we have Broca's, we have conductive aphasia, we have anomic aphasia, and we've got global aphasia. Okay, so we have with Wernicke's, comprehension is impaired, repetition is impaired, naming is impaired, and fluency is preserved or increased. And we've got Broca's. We have comprehension is preserved, repetition is impaired, naming is impaired, fluency is decreased. We've got conductive. We have conductive. We've got comprehension is preserved, repetition is impaired, naming is impaired, and then fluency is preserved. With anomic, we've got comprehensive is preserved, repetition is preserved, naming is impaired, and then fluency is preserved except for word finding pauses. So fluency is preserved, but when the person is trying to find words, there are pauses. And we go global, everything: comprehension, repetition, naming, and fluency, impaired, and decreased. So basically, we use these to tell or to judge aphasia, right? Comprehension, repetition, naming, and fluency. These 4: comprehension, repetition, naming, and fluency. All right. So the next is apraxia or apraxia or apraxia. We've got aphasia, and apraxia. Right? Apraxia. Apraxia. Okay. Apraxia and aphasia. Okay, so apraxia, we don't even know what apraxia is, right? A neurological disorder characterized by the inability to perform learned familiar movements on command, even though the command is understood and there is a willingness to perform the movement. Both the desire and the capacity to move are present, but the person simply cannot execute the act. So I understand, but I just can't execute. I have the capacity to move and I have the capacity to do what is being asked of me, but I understand the command that is given, but I just can't do it. With aphasia, I want to say something, but I may not understand, I may not be able to repeat, I may not be able to name, or say the name of something and I may not be fluent, you know. Okay, so this is the video I just watched on the vestibular something. I'm going to link this video, copy URL. I'm going to link it, and yeah, I'm gonna link this video and you can watch it anytime you want. Thank you very much. I'm even past 30 minutes. I've spoken a lot into this video here. What's gonna happen is, if it goes well, or if I feel like this is really nice, at least I've learned something today, I might continue and it'll help. Even though I'm not moving as fast as I hoped, at least I've done something. I've talked about the levels of disturbance of consciousness. We've got somnolence, we've got sopor, we've got coma, we have the disturbance of the content, right? And that we've got the persistent vegetative states, we've got a brain death, and then brain death includes the brainstem reflex responses and not being present for more than 6 hours. And then we have the Loctin syndrome, right? And then there's more. And there's aphasia, there's Aphasia. So I'll continue next time from here. I hope you enjoyed it. Yeah, I'm a bit sleepy because it's late. It's 3:52 a.m. I hope you enjoyed it, and if you did, just comment, let me know, and I'll see you in the next one. Peace.